Welcome to the Renegade Nutrition Podcast, where we discuss all things wellness.
I'm Eleni Welch, nutritionist.
And I'm Kay Boyer, health enthusiast. Welcome back, Renegades.
Welcome, Renegades.
Welcome to our conversation. Eleni and I have been talking for hours already. We've solved the world's problems, but now you guys welcome and you can help us solve the world's problems.
Yeah, we were deep in philosophy this morning.
We must have needed some connection.
We must have.
Yes.
See, it's you guys probably like from watching this, you think like Kay and I actually don't get to talk a lot outside of the podcast.
Right. Outside of food.
Outside of
Is
food
mostly
and the
what we
podcast.
talk about.
So normally it's like probably like 20 minutes we
Yeah.
talk before we begin.
Yeah.
But today we had some extra time and we just sat and
Yeah.
talked for like an hour.
We have solved the world's
We did
problems.
solve the
And I
world's
think
problems.
it starts with sugar, which is
It does start
handy.
with sugar.
Which is handy that today's topic has better alternatives for us.
Yes.
Yes.
This feels far away. I'm going to adjust that really
Yeah,
quick.
get that in there.
Yes. Today's topic is all about alternative sweeteners. I called this
Yes.
episode the comprehensive guide to alternative sweeteners.
It's going to be a long one.
Well, it's the same length. Like my
Yes.
notes are about 20 pages, which is actually how long my notes are for most
You
podcast episodes.
were an excellent student. You're still a good student.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think that title sounds kind of boring.
Oh,
So I think we should
Yeah.
come up with a more exciting title
yeah.
before the
like-
podcast releases.
Like a better way to eat a cupcake or something like that. We'll figure it out. We'll get there.
Yeah.
Sugar you can actually eat or yeah.
I'll let your
Or-
brain work away.
Or how to like still satisfy your sweet tooth.
Mm.
Something about sweet tooth.
Satisfy your sweet tooth
The right way.
healthy way.
The healthy way.
Healthy way.
I like that.
Okay, we'll get there.
Okay.
We're circling in on it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. We'll get there.
Anyway, well, before we begin, last week we said hello to our listeners in Latvia.
Yes.
Today we get to head across the Baltic Sea and say hello to our listeners in Sweden.
Sweden, our blonde friend.
I was like,
People ask me if I'm Swedish all the time.
Are you?
Because I'm blonde.
do you
but-
know?
Well, no, I'm like, I did my ancestry test and I'm
yeah.
all like, it's just like German, some like French German, and then a little English. So yeah, but I
okay.
wish I loved
Yeah.
those countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually have some Swedish in me according to my 23.
You
so-
do.
do.
I love it with your dark hair, and you're mostly Italian, right? Or
Yes, it's
Greek.
70% Italian.
Okay.
It's actually a very small percentage Greek, which
Oh.
we just don't know how that happened.
Yeah, because your grandma, you went and visited
My
her
grandma's
in
literally-
Greece.
My grandma's fully Greek. She
Yeah.
moved to America from Greece when she was 17.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
There's been so much like Roman occupation and like
Got it.
Venetian occupation. Like Crete,
Yes.
the island she grew up on
Okay.
and was born on,
Yes.
was a very strategic island for a lot
Okay.
of military
Okay.
strategies. And
Oh.
so it was sort of inhabited a lot. And
So your great grandpa might have.
they might have just
Okay.
been fully Italian. It
Okay.
might just be that everybody that lives on Crete is fully Italian and doesn't know it.
Okay.
Because when we got her genealogy back, it said she was mostly Italian, but she's like 100% Greek.
Oh.
So I don't know if that's like fault in the like 23andMe,
Oh.
how they analyze genetics.
And it would be like where they cut off your genetic heritage.
Because
to
they're
name
very
where you're
similar
from. Yeah.
cultures anyway.
Yes,
Like
yes.
I've been both Greece and Italy, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of similarities, but they're
Yeah.
definitely different.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much of that is actually just because of like cultural differences that have arisen
Yes.
or because of genetic differences.
Well, now I need to study the genome.
Mhm. So I thought I would be about 50% Italian because my dad's full Italian, quote unquote. Nobody I've learned through these
Okay.
genetic
It's-
tests.
Oh, it's fall. Right.
Nobody is like 100% anything.
Right.
Like we
right.
have a lot of like African heritage
Yes.
and
Yes.
Eastern Asian heritage
Yeah.
and Middle East heritage. And
You know what? I love that our ancestors are like, we got a little piece of all of it.
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah.
We are
so
all,
anyway,
because we're all connected.
but I do have some Swedish
Oh, yeah.
in me through my grandpa, who was very, very blonde, very blue-eyed,
Okay.
very Swedish looking.
You did on your dad's side.
Mom's side.
Mom's side.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Look at that. Well,
Yeah.
good.
Anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you, Swedish listeners.
Yeah. So here's some fun facts about Sweden. Swedes are known for their generosity and kind nature.
Oh,
And Sweden is a country that strives to help out around the world.
love this.
It is the only country on the planet where donations are more than 1% of the total GDP.
Wow.
Yeah, go Swede.
Go Sweden. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, that's cool. So they donate enough that it's actually more than 1% of their whole gross domestic product. That's pretty impressive.
That is totally impressive. And you have a generosity spirit. So, okay, that comes,
comes from my Swedish.
Sweden. Oh, yeah. Italy is too.
Italy and Greece, they're all pretty. Everywhere but the US is pretty generous. Yeah.
That's fair.
Also, here's a cool fact. So in like the northern parts of Sweden, they can have as little as 5 hours a day of daylight in the winter months.
I'm depressed thinking about it.
Right. And so to help combat seasonal affective disorder, one city in Sweden installed light boxes in bus stops to allow people waiting for the bus to enjoy a little extra daylight during the harsh, dark winter days.
Thank you, Sweden. Thank you. That is very cool.
Like, good looking out for your people.
I love it. I installed one in Kelowna, a light box called like the sunlight, or is our what are they called? Sunlight therapy, infrared. In Kelowna to help those people because we need sunshine in these northern hemispheres.
That's right. I just like that a whole city did it. So every bus stop, and from what I understand, it's like Sweden is also one of the greenest countries because they rely so heavily on public transportation. Okay. So like in Iowa, having something at the bus stop might not have a lot of impact.
Fair.
But in Sweden, having light boxes at the bus stops because so many people were using that as a mode of transportation actually had a big impact.
That is amazing.
To help combat seasonal affective disorder.
Good job, government.
Way to be like on top of it, green, generous, progressive,
health-minded.
Health-minded.
Cool.
Love Sweden.
Yes, go Sweden. Thank you, listeners.
Speaking of Swede-inners. On to this week's episode all about sweeteners.
That was an awesome transition. You nailed it.
Thank you. I practiced it. Literally, it's in my notes. Okay, so yes, today's episode is all about alternative sweeteners. I'm not going to be able to say that without thinking of sweeteners.
All the dads listening are like, yes, dad jokes. Nailed it.
So one of our listeners a while ago, probably, I don't even know how long ago, I can't keep track of time anymore. It's a strange phenomenon these days.
Yep.
But probably like 6 months ago, one of our listeners reached out to me and requested an episode on alternative sweeteners.
Oh, yes.
And at the time I was like, well, we talked about that in the
sugar series.
In our sugar cereal, part 3, I think is where we talked about it, the how to quit sugar. We talked about sugar alternatives, but we haven't had just an episode dedicated to that.
I like that too, to circle back and like get back to the specifics. I like that.
Yeah.
I need help with it too.
Because it was just the tail end of that episode. Yeah. So you'd have to listen to the whole episode
afterthought.
Yeah. So this is a dedicated episode.
I'm here for it. Good.
And I don't know if you've seen any of the recent news headlines popping up about erythritol.
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe some of our listeners have. I'll talk about it in a minute.
Drama in the health food industry.
Yeah, so I thought there was no time like the present, right? Mm-hmm. So, anyway. Okay. So one thing we won't really talk about in this episode is sugar or high fructose corn syrup or any of those standard conventional sweeteners, or their health effects or why you would not want to eat them, because literally we have 3 whole episodes dedicated to that topic.
Some of our beginning early ones, so go clear back.
Yes, they are like one of our, I think it's our first, besides introducing ourselves and having that intro episode, it's the first, it's the next 3 episodes.
Which would in March of
2022.
Back in March. Check that out.
I think March 2nd was our very first episode. That was the like Meet the Renegades. And then the next 3 episodes after that are our sugar cereal.
Are we a year old?
Yes.
We need to have a birthday.
Oh yeah. March 2nd was our anniversary.
I love that.
Spotify sent me a little like birthday card.
Happy birthday, listeners. Thank you for being on this ride with us.
Yeah, for 1 whole year.
That's amazing.
And I did just count our episodes, and we had 55 episodes, which makes sense. Well, I was counting ones we've recorded that are like scheduled to play.
Okay.
So we don't necessarily have, I guess by the time this is coming out, we'll have more than 55 that have actually released. But I was counting ahead. Yeah. So we've had an episode a week for over a year now.
Gosh, we're consistent.
Isn't
right there.
Crazy.
Gosh.
God.
Gosh, we grew up. When did that happen, right?
I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah. Slow down.
Okay. So what we will talk about, apparently Kay and I are just distractible today. What we will talk about today are what I'm terming, it's not like I came up with the term, but what I'm calling alternative sweeteners, which include sugar substitutes, both natural and artificial. So we will talk about natural and artificial sugar substitutes, which I am just blanketing as alternative sweeteners. So these encompass things like honey, molasses, maple syrup, agave, stevia, sugar alcohols like xylitol and erythritol and monk fruit. And it also will include the artificial sweeteners, which is what I'm going to start with. I'm going to get those out of the way and then move into the other ones. So here's what I'll say about artificial sweeteners. And I think that you may, if you listened to our sugar cereal, you'll remember we talked about artificial sweeteners and the research that was out about artificial sweeteners. And you may remember that I said, remember like way back in the day where there was all that hype that artificial sweeteners caused cancer.
Okay.
And I said that a lot of that research was actually kind of misinterpreted / poorly done.
Okay.
So there is like the thing I will lead into about artificial sweeteners is that there is a lot of mixed research. This is what I found.
Okay. And artificial, that one you're talking of like
things like aspartame,
sucralose.
Yes.
Those ones.
The ones that are in the like bright blue, bright pink warning packets.
At
the cafe.
Yep.
Right. So there's actually a lot of mixed research.
Okay.
So research that shows that they're harmful, research that shows that they're beneficial.
Okay.
I kind of looked at it all.
Okay.
And that is my conclusion, is that the jury is really out on that.
Okay.
But here's what I'll go into. Here's what research more consistently shows. I'll go into some of those things. So in the United States, there are currently 6 artificial sweeteners that are approved for consumption. So those include asulfamane, K, which is that brand Sweet One.
Okay.
Aspartame and neotame, which is the brand NutraSweet.
Okay.
Saccharin, which is the Sweet and Low brand. Sucralose, which is Splenda. And then Advantame, which I think that one is newer. I think that's more recently FDA approved. Okay. Maybe like 2017. I don't know. 2014, 2000, somewhere in there. Don't quote me on the date. But I think it for our history of sweetener consumption, that one's relatively new. So artificial sweeteners are typically several hundred to several thousand times sweeter than common sucrose, glucose.
Okay.
So that's
the
why
idea is you use less.
You use less. Okay. That's why they're very popular and recommended in the diabetic circles, because where you can't have a lot of introduced sugar, these sweeteners are extra sweet. So you only need a very little bit.
A little drop.
So it's a good concept, honestly. Like, yeah, it's a good concept. Yeah. But there's a lot of conflicting studies about their actual safety. So there are studies that show that artificial sweeteners increase weight loss, and then there are studies that show that they impede weight loss. I read them both. There are studies showing that they cause cancer in animal studies, and then there are human studies that show no association between artificial sweeteners and cancer.
All right.
Although the results in the animal studies were pretty definitive that they caused cancer, a lot of the amounts that were used in those studies, like no human being would use. And they've just not been that translatable to human studies.
Okay.
So actually, the current evidence doesn't really support a strong association between artificial sweeteners and cancer.
Okay.
However, there is a body of research that shows that artificial sweeteners can harm our health in other ways. So please don't think I'm recommending them.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
The first is that artificial sweeteners can alter our gut microbiota. So they're associated.
Everything's in the gut.
Everything's in the gut. So, and we've had multiple episodes on gut health. So, if you've listened to those,
protect the gut.
It's not a good idea to mess with our gut microbiota. So, artificial sweeteners can increase populations of the Firmicutes and Bacteroides species.
That one.
Which is a bacterial pattern that's associated with obesity in humans.
Oh, so maybe that's the correlation of like the study that was like with the weight gain. You know what I've heard? I'm jumping in here on a lay person's advice here. I did hear my friend that drinks a lot of like the diet colas with that in it. And they're like, well, that way I can have my sweet, or like there's no calories in this one, so I can still have other sweets. So almost like you thought you were tricking the system, so you still let yourself have other bad things.
I'll talk about that.
Oh, there's a psychology to it. Okay, continue. Sorry.
It's actually part of the problem. No.
Sorry to jump ahead. Jump ahead.
Jump ahead. It's fine. Kay just gives us previews of what's to come.
A little taste.
She keeps you hooked.
Yes.
So I will talk about that and why that's a problem.
It's a thing. Okay.
So artificial sweeteners can also inhibit bacteria in our gut from reproducing, both good and bad bacteria. Okay. So they mess with our gut microbiome because they affect the balance. So in a healthy gut microbiome, there's a balance of good and bad bacteria.
Okay.
Bad is in quotes, because from what we know about the bacteria is that they can have pathogenic effects. But when they're in balance with beneficial bacteria in our gut, those pathogenic effects are repressed. And so they're not necessarily bad in small quantities. When they become bad is when they can multiply and take over the gut bacteria. And then their pathogenic effects are more pronounced. But artificial sweeteners mess with both. So they stop both groups from reproducing, which is not great. Not great.
Yeah.
So they can impede the growth of E. coli, which can be both pathogenic and beneficial, and the periodontal pathogens that can cause conditions like gum disease. So that's kind of good. But at the same time, they're also increasing those Bacteroidetes and those Firmicutes strains, which can impede weight loss and cause obesity. So they can have both positive and detrimental effects on our health. But either way, they're impacting the gut microbiota, and that's something we want to be really careful with.
Yes.
Even after artificial sweetener use has been discontinued, those microbial disturbances persist. So even if you stop taking or consuming artificial sweeteners, they have a long-lasting impact on your gut. So not great.
Okay.
Another thing that artificial sweeteners can do is they impair glucose tolerance. So the problem with impairing glucose tolerance is that that's already impaired in people who are suffering from diabetes. And so when you're giving somebody a sweetener to replace sugar in their diet because they have diabetes, but that sugar also impairs their glucose tolerance, that's not good.
Right.
That's a problem, right?
Yeah.
And we think that they impair glucose tolerance because of the alterations they cause in the gut microbiota. So in one study, an animal study, so rats were exposed to 8 weeks of aspartame, and they had an altered gut microbiota composition and elevated fasting blood glucose. In another study, consuming saccharin for 11 weeks produced compositional changes in the gut microbiota and then led to glucose intolerance. So again, those are animal studies, but from what we know about studying animals is that they're at least the first step in understanding what might be happening in humans. And so glucose intolerance increases the risk of metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. And artificial sweetener consumption is associated with an increased risk of each of these conditions.
Okay. Not great.
Right. So remember, animals have different metabolism and physiological mechanisms than humans, so those studies aren't directly translatable, but they are the first step. So in areas where only animal studies have been done, human studies are needed. But another thing that we know, so we do know that consumption of artificial sweeteners is associated with increased risk of type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and cardiovascular disease. But we also know that people who are already unhealthy may be more likely to be consuming artificial sweeteners.
Oh, so in the correlation.
So it could be correlation without causation. You
kind
of have to start at the beginning in time. So you have to get in before somebody has started use of artificial sweeteners, look at their health at that point, and then follow them for like 25, 35 years and see what outcomes are coming. But of course, those types of studies, those like long-term studies, are not really practical. I mean, we do them and we have studies like that. We have ongoing studies, you know. But of course it takes like 40 to 50 years to get the results.
And there's so many factors on health.
And there's so many factors. Exactly.
That. Yeah.
So we're in a bind. Artificial sweeteners also can alter your hormones. So sucralose and the aspartame K can increase insulin release by activating the sweet taste receptors and calcium sensing receptors. So actually consuming those artificial sweeteners may not be as diabetic friendly as we thought because they're still triggering insulin release just like regular sugar does.
Oh, tricky.
And so that's a big problem for diabetics who are trying to balance their insulin because some of diabetes is contributed to by insulin resistance. So you don't want your body producing more and more and more insulin because that contributes to your cells becoming less and less sensitive to that insulin and your body having to produce more. So having things like sucralose and aspartame K still triggers that insulin release response and can contribute to that insulin resistance.
Oh, okay.
So not necessarily diabetic friendly. Artificial sweeteners are also connected with impaired neurological function. The ingestion of artificially sweetened drinks is associated with increased risk of stroke and dementia, and aspartame is known to cause neurological symptoms such as headaches, seizures, and migraines.
Oh.
The way that aspartame does this is it increases the amount of free radicals in the brain, and it elevates our levels of phenylalanine and aspartic acid, which inhibit the synthesis and release of neurotransmitters. So all of those things have to be in balance to have a healthy brain. And when they get inhibited or out of balance, then we have things like migraines and seizures and other neurological disorders.
Okay. And I try not to mess with that brain stuff at all. I try not to.
I'm trying to keep what I have left safe.
Yeah.
And then, you know, again, as far as helping with weight loss, there's a lot of ambiguity as to whether they do help with weight loss or don't help with weight loss. It's pretty mixed. It seems like there's some confusion in the studies because, like we talked about just a minute ago, artificial sweetener consumption is associated with being obese, but it's also possible that obese individuals are more likely to consume artificial sweeteners. So it's kind of like a chicken and the egg situation. We don't actually know what's causing what. However, there was a 2017 meta-analysis of the available and qualified studies done on artificial sweetener consumption and weight gain, weight loss. And the authors did conclude that artificial sweeteners do not necessarily lead to weight loss and in some cases appear to cause weight gain. So remember, a meta-analysis looks at every available study, kind of runs them through a series of parameters to make sure they're qualified studies. So they may reject studies that are too small or were done incorrectly. So generally, if a meta-analysis is done the right way, it's only the best, most qualified studies that end up in it. And from that meta-analysis, it did not appear that artificial sweeteners contributed in any meaningful way to weight loss. Artificial sweeteners also fail to reduce ghrelin, which is the appetite stimulating hormone that rises when we're fasting between meals, which makes us feel hungry, and then decreases once we've eaten, which helps us feel full. So because artificial sweeteners don't trigger that hormone release, you can consume things with artificial sweeteners in them and not feel full. And so then that can lead to overeating. Exactly. So then that means you're feeling kind of hungry all the time. You're not feeling satisfied. That's a big problem for individuals who are trying to achieve a healthy weight.
Yep.
Also, there's a lot of recommendations for pregnant and nursing women to avoid artificial sweeteners because they're associated with an increased risk of a large for gestational age baby. Even when other like factors, including BMI and other risk factors are controlled. And then also they've seen that even up to 7 years down the road, the children of women who consumed artificial sweeteners during pregnancy are at an increased risk of being overweight or obese. But again, how much of that is because their mothers were consuming artificial sweeteners, and how much of it is because people who are overweight or obese tend to consume artificial sweeteners and also tend to have children who are overweight or obese because of genetic and environmental factors. However, I still don't recommend it for pregnant women because there just are so many. I guess where I'm coming from is the research is mixed. Right, on artificial sweeteners. But I'm about to read through a list of like 10 alternative sweeteners that aren't artificial, that are way better, that have actual health benefits, and that have more positive research behind them. So I don't recommend artificial sweeteners like the ones that I've talked about so far, because why chance it?
Yeah, I agree. Why risk? Yeah, when nature has given us something we've eaten for tens of thousands of years.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so exactly. So there may or may not be negative results from consuming artificial sweeteners, but there's also not really a lot of reasons to consume them. Especially in this day and age where alternative sweeteners that are healthier for you are more and more available.
Which is awesome. Let's give a hand to that. Yes. Right.
Round of applause.
I remember when I started to eat healthier back, like, 10, 15 years ago, I was more conscious of it. And I was like, man, you can't find this stuff anywhere. Man, you can't find it. And now I can't say that anymore. You can find it everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Which maybe because we're in a city, maybe if you lived in a town with not a natural grocery center, it'd be hard. Okay. But even Walmart has like a lot of the alternatives.
Costco has it, Walmart, I'm sure Sam's Club.
And you know what? You can get on Amazon. Okay. There's no excuse, friends. Healthy things are available.
Yeah. Easily. And if you live outside of an area where like you can get into town or you can get shipments of things, right? You can still have honey.
You probably have your own beehive if that's your case.
Right? So I will talk now about some healthy options for sweeteners and my top recommended alternative sweeteners.
Good.
And these are basically in order.
Oh, good. So of favorite first?
Yes. Okay. Best. I wouldn't say best to worst, but most research supported beneficial to least research supported beneficial.
Okay.
Let's say that.
Okay. I'm here for it.
Okay. So number one is honey. Honey. Raw and unheated. That's the qualifier. Raw and unheated. I'll talk about that a little bit.
That's God put it on the earth. Yep.
The second is monk fruit. The third is
is monk fruit your second?
I wouldn't say it's my personal favorite because to me, there's an aftertaste with monk fruit that I don't love. But from a research perspective and a health benefits perspective, it's very widely supported.
I would have put it later down the list. I love this. I have monk fruit in my cupboard.
I might have before I started the research for this episode.
Well, good. Okay.
Yep. Okay. Then stevia.
Yes.
Then molasses.
Yum.
Maple syrup.
Yes.
Coconut sugar.
Yes.
And sugar alcohols. And I'll just say like molasses, maple syrup, coconut. Like I could have put those kind of in any order. Yeah. I think molasses would still be at the top of the list because of its vitamin and mineral content. But like maple syrup and coconut sugar are kind of like interchangeable in my book. And sugar alcohols I'll get into. It's not necessarily, they're not at the bottom of the list because they're bad for everybody. They're at the bottom of the list because they are bad for some individuals who have GI problems. Okay. Whereas things like honey don't really mess with that. And in fact can improve GI issues. Yeah. So I wouldn't say like, if you have a healthy gut, sugar, alcohol shouldn't be a problem if you consume them responsibly.
Well, okay. Now, since monk fruit is on the list with all these things, I sort of thought monk fruit was a sugar alcohol, but it's a real food.
It's an extract from, I don't know how to pronounce it.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's like lo guan. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an extract of that. So the sugar alcohols are anything ending in like tol or all, like that OL usually indicates that erythritol, xylitol, those sorts of things.
Okay. And stevia is like an actual leaf.
Right, extracted from the actual leaf. Honey, of course, is honey.
Yes.
Extracted from the mouths of bees.
Yes.
Coconut sugar, I'm not sure. I'm sure that they probably just like collect the juice and then evaporate the juice. That's my guess.
Okay.
And they probably have the fiber from the like fruit as well. That would be my assumption. And then like molasses is again a natural sweetener, right? And maple syrup are so.
Okay, cool. Well, that's good to know about monk fruit because I have it in my cupboard, but I kind of go to it last. But now maybe I'll go to it second.
Yeah, there you go. So we'll start with honey. So honey, raw and unheated, has long been an important food in the human diet. Now, interestingly, the fructose to glucose ratio of honey is similar to that of high fructose corn syrup.
Oh.
With about 38% fructose and 31% glucose, the rest being primarily water.
Oh.
Which is one argument I've heard proponents of high fructose corn syrup make is like, oh, well, it's the same as honey. It's just like honey. However, metabolically, within our bodies, honey does not affect our body at all in the same way that high fructose corn syrup does.
Oh.
So honey contains enzymes, proteins, trace minerals, flavonoids, and other polyphenols that impact how it's released, how it's metabolized in the body.
Wow.
Increasing evidence suggests that honey can actually be a functional food with healthy physiological benefits.
I love this. I love honey.
2 human studies found that supplementing with 3 to 5 tablespoons of honey per day, which is kind of a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Increases serum antioxidant levels, including vitamin C and glutathione.
Wow. I've said this before on the podcast, but Beekeeper's Natural. So when my kiddos are sick, they have the super honey. What's it? It has like the
like propolis in it.
The propolis and the queen bee, whatever, and
like royal jelly.
Royal jelly, that's what. And then it has whatever the third component is.
Maybe pollen or
pollen, yeah. So I get that from Beekeeper's Naturals, and I give it to my kids when we get sick. And then they also have like the dry you put on your food, or the actual honey, or we have throat spray. I love that company. Yeah. We should have them sponsor us. If you're listening, Beekeeper's Naturals, yeah. And that's amazing because all the benefits of it. So
yeah. In another study, that same dose of honey, so that 3 to 5 tablespoons of honey, lowered plasma prostaglandin levels by 48 to 63%.
That is so much honey.
After 15 days, signaling a reduction in inflammation. So even consuming that quantity of honey, which I wouldn't, and then it is debatable, like, does it have to be that amount of honey to have those beneficial effects? Because I wouldn't eat that much in a day.
But then you were saying it doesn't affect your glycemic level?
Right. Yeah, I'll get into that.
Because I'm like, that's a lot of sugar.
Yeah, seems like. But it doesn't affect our bodies in the same way that sugar does for a number of reasons. So
wow. Okay. Loving honey. Keep going.
In overweight and obese patients, consumption of about 3.5 tablespoons of honey per day for a month resulted in lower LDL cholesterol, triglycerides, and C-reactive protein, which C-reactive protein or CRP is that like when it's elevated can be indicative of heart disease.
Wow.
In another study, honey also reduced levels of homocysteine, which is another marker of inflammation, and blood glucose. So it actually lowered blood glucose.
Whoa.
Which is, if you're replacing normal sugar consumption with honey, it makes sense because it doesn't impact our insulin and glucose response in the same way that normal sugar would.
I am in love with honey right now.
Honey also has antibacterial activity and can shorten the duration of acute bacterial diarrhea in children.
Also good to know. Also good to know.
Specific, but effective.
Yeah.
And even in some studies of H. pylori, we found that honey might be effective at eradicating H. pylori, which we talked about a lot in our probiotics episode.
I love this.
Animal studies have shown that honey also may have potential antiviral, anti-tumor, and anti-mutagenic effects. So basically, anti-tumor and anti-mutagenic would decrease risk of cancer. And antiviral actually can decrease risk of cancer too, because some viruses are associated with cancer, and reduction of irritable bowel disease associated inflammation, or inflammatory bowel disease. Inflammatory bowel disease associated inflammation. But we haven't necessarily had the human studies to back those findings up. But that's what animal studies have shown. So it would appear that honey has many benefits that
gold from God.
Exactly.
Unto the earth.
That outweigh the potential downsides of consuming a concentrated sweetener. Again, I always recommend raw honey, which does have all of those enzymes and minerals and vitamins in place, as opposed to heated or pasteurized honey, which does not. So once you heat honey and heat it to the point where it loses that mineral and antioxidant and enzyme effects, it does kind of basically become like corn syrup, because molecularly it's pretty structurally similar, but you're removing all the benefits when you heat it. So it's not necessarily the best choice for baking, although we use it in baking recipes.
We ain't perfect.
No. Well, and we're beekeepers, right? My husband and I keep bees. So honey is,
of course you do. It's adorable.
Yeah. So honey is something that we have on hand, and so we just would use it, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of recipes that use honey. So to me, it's kind of like, it's got so many benefits.
Yeah.
We consume it raw any way we can.
Yeah.
But if we use it in baked goods, I'm also not worried about it.
Yes.
I'm just saying that like there are other alternative sweeteners that might be better.
For heating.
So I don't usually recommend it necessarily for baking, because you're removing a lot of its beneficial effects. But it's kind of like neutral then at that point, how it affects you. Hey there, Renegades. Eleni here, briefly interrupting this episode of the Renegade Nutrition podcast. I wanted to highlight a company that Kay and I have recently discovered that we love, and that company is Bulletproof. Bulletproof sells high-quality nutritional supplements, and every product that Kay and I have tried from them personally, we have found to be excellent. It's important when you choose a supplement that it contain the bioactive forms in order for it to be effective, and Bulletproof has just the right forms in just the right amounts. Right now, if you go to bulletproof.com and use the code RENEGADE15 at checkout, you can receive 15% off your order. That's Renegade, RENEGADE 15. Use that code at checkout to get 15% off, and we'll earn a small commission too. Thanks for your support. All right, back to this week's episode of the Renegade Nutrition Podcast. So the second thing on the list, monk fruit, I was kind of like, hey, I didn't necessarily, I wouldn't have necessarily put it at the top of my list, but after the research I did. Okay, so I still don't know how to pronounce this fruit, but it's luhanguo. Luohanguo.
Sounds delicious.
Luhanguo comes from a plant native to Southeast Asia. Monk fruit contains compounds called mogrosides that are 250 times sweeter than sucralose and have been traditionally used as a natural non-caloric sweetener. Monk fruit does have a pretty robust body of evidence supporting its beneficial health effects. So it is rich in vitamin C and flavonoids. The mogrosides it contains have anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, and anti-cancer effects. They can decrease blood sugar, total cholesterol, and triglycerides, and they can improve glucose and fat metabolism.
Wow.
Yeah. If you're interested in trying monk fruit sweetener, a good brand is that Lakanto Pure, Lakanto. They have the monk fruit extracts. They're a good company, and I think they're pretty widely available. I don't remember if they're at Costco, but I know they're at the local grocery stores. Because that brand, and there are other good brands out there too, right? But just look for a brand like that one that's free of fillers, additives, and artificial flavorings. Okay. So if you're branching, I know that brand is good. There are other brands that are equally good. You just need to make sure you read the label, because sometimes you think you're getting a pure product and you're not. Also, monk fruit does not appear to affect insulin secretion like the artificial sweeteners do.
Okay. Cool. I'm sold now.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah. But there are, to me, like, monk fruit does have a very definitive aftertaste.
Yeah.
I think that this is one of those things where some people can taste it and some people don't, because I could literally, I know just by tasting any product if it was made with monk fruit.
Okay.
Like, I can take one bite and I'm like, oh, that has monk fruit in it.
Okay. Where I don't taste it as bad, where I'm like, oh no, that was good.
Yeah. And like, and it doesn't bother.
But it's fine and good. Yeah.
The one we buy, I think, is mixed with erythritol. I think that's what it's mixed with.
You have me hooked to figure out the erythritol.
Oh yeah.
So that
I'm saving it to the end.
I knew it. That was the hook.
Yeah. And so I do think that one tastes better, because it's not such that, like, I don't know what it is.
Like a tangy, like,
there's some sort of aftertaste that it's not my favorite. To me, it's overly sweet. Like any product it's used in, it just becomes overly sweet. And I'm always like, I wish you had just used less.
Just do less.
Just a little bit. Or left it out and let me sweeten it myself. That's always my main thing. Okay, so now we'll talk about stevia. And it's hard to know, like, should this be third on the list? Should it not be third on the list? Because it's pretty, like, contentiously debated in the nutritional world.
Is it? Tell me more.
There are some people that are really big advocates of stevia and some people that are, like, strongly recommending against it. And you can kind of find good articles and evidence and arguments on either side.
Wait, I have never heard of beef on stevia. Tell me.
So here's the, like, mix. Here's what we know.
Tell me everything.
Here's the beneficial things we know about stevia. So first of all, stevia is natural in that it comes from a perennial herb. We're actually growing some ourselves.
I was gonna say, it's like of the earth.
Yeah, we grow it. We grew some not in our garden. We had it in a pot last year. We brought the pot in and we're kind of overwintering it, and then we're gonna plant it this year. So that's one thing, is like, we're growing whole stevia. The way we'll process it is we'll dry the leaves and grind them up. So we get kind of all the benefits of the whole plant.
Sounds amazing.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
So it is a perennial herb. It's native to South America. It produces compounds called steviol glycosides in its leaves. And those compounds are what we isolate and use as a non-caloric sweetener. So it's roughly 200 to 400 times sweeter than regular sucrose. And it contains, so here's one of the arguments against it.
Okay, let's hear it.
Is that stevia may have, like, it doesn't contain any calories, and that is one of the issues with the artificial sweeteners.
Okay, wait, that is no problem to me.
Yes.
Okay, so keep going.
The problem is that with the sweet taste, without the influx of sugar, it can confuse our insulin response.
Oh, I see.
And I don't know why that does. To be honest, I don't know why that doesn't happen with every sweetener.
Yeah, like honey, I'd figure.
Like honey tastes sweet, xylitol tastes sweet. So, like, why doesn't that happen? Like monk fruit tastes sweet. Why doesn't that happen with every sweetener? I don't know, but there are obviously some sort of chemical compounds that influence how these sweeteners affect our body. So stevia is thought to be one that could potentially cause insulin release, but then you don't have any sugar for the insulin to take up because it's not sugar. So it's not actually, like, causing a glycemic effect.
It's like a mimicking.
Yeah, it's just that your body releases insulin, but that can cause insulin resistance. If you're consistently releasing insulin without sugar for it to pick up, that's a problem.
Wow. I'm also now questioning stevia. Okay.
But here's what makes it confusing, right? So there are some studies that show that, but then there are some studies that show that stevia can improve insulin sensitivity, which would combat insulin resistance, and it has antioxidant properties.
Oh, you're right. Now I'm confused.
Okay. This is the confusing part of it. So it's like there are studies that show that it doesn't do that, and studies show that it does. So that's the issue. This is why it's debated, right?
Yes.
So, like, the people who are against it are quoting the studies that are against it. The people that are for it are quoting the studies for it.
Yeah.
You really can't argue with other side. They're both right.
Right.
So in one study, participants were given a dose of either sucrose, or regular, like, table sugar, or stevia before lunch.
Okay.
So compared with the sucrose preload, the stevia preload resulted in lower blood sugar after the meal and a lower insulin load, even compared with things like aspartame. So again, aspartame can cause that insulin response. Stevia showed less of a response than sugar or aspartame. So it did appear to be better.
Okay.
Also, even though the stevia provided fewer calories than the sucrose, participants didn't compensate by consuming more calories at lunch.
Oh.
So it didn't cause them to overeat like something like aspartame might.
Yeah. Okay.
So the argument with like regular sugar is that because it provides calories, we're less likely to like overeat when we have it, right? In the immediate term.
Yeah.
But again, remember that because your body processes it so fast, it moves out of your body really fast and you're hungry again. Exactly.
Yep.
But so stevia didn't seem to cause people to overeat like some of those other nutritives.
So I think you're right to keep this on a scale of like better to worse. So not that it's so bad, right? But at least it's better than aspartame, less than honey, somewhere in there.
And every sweetener that we talk about will have some downsides that research has shown. So it's like, where do you put it in the list?
Yeah.
So I kind of just put it smack in the middle because I feel pretty neutral.
I know, it's like it could go either
neutral
way.
about it.
Okay.
Another study, a small study that had 16 volunteers, found that 5-gram doses of stevia extract every 6 hours for 3 days improved glucose tolerance.
Improved? Very confused now.
And in insulin-resistant and diabetic rats, stevia improved insulin sensitivity, glucose tolerance, and liver and kidney function.
Now I'm back to eating stevia. I don't even know where to go. Here we go. Yeah.
So stevia also has demonstrated antibacterial effects, which just like the artificial sweeteners could be either positive or negative because it's influencing the gut microbiota. So again, it's like, I don't know if it's altering your gut microbiota. We don't know necessarily that the outcome of that will be good or bad, but we just know in general, it's not that good of an idea to mess with our gut microbiota. It also might have endocrine disrupting effects. It may therefore have detrimental effects on hormonal balance. But again,
also things they try
studies are conflicting on that, right?
Yeah. Oh, golly.
It does appear to have anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and antibacterial properties when tested in animal studies. But we don't know so far whether it maintains those same properties in human studies because it hasn't been carried out.
Wow. That was a lot. I got to think about
This is why it's in the middle of the list. So again, you can understand why some people are staunchly against it and some people are staunchly for it because it does have benefits and it has detriments. I don't know.
Yeah.
But to me, I still think if you have a healthy gut microbiome, if you're already living a healthy lifestyle,
eat it in moderation.
Right.
Eat it with a healthy balance. If you eat it with a fat, if you eat it with healthy foods, maybe it's okay.
I don't think that stevia will be the thing that pushes you into the unhealthy zone. You know what I mean? Like,
that is a very good point. It's like get lost in the weeds here.
Right. Like, okay. If you're already very like immunologically compromised, if your gut is unhealthy, if your immune system is unhealthy, if you're battling like a bunch of chronic diseases, stevia may or may not help. But if you're healthy, it's not going to be the thing that gives you those chronic diseases. Yeah. That's my opinion. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I think that was a wise place to come to.
Right. Yeah. So I still consume it if that makes anybody. I like the Lily's chocolate, which is sweetened with stevia. I would rather have that than chocolate that's sweetened with sugar.
Yeah.
To me, it does have more benefits.
Yeah. Same.
So
I have my Lily's every day. So, okay, well, good.
Okay. So moving on to maple syrup, coconut sugar, and molasses, which I've kind of just lumped together.
Yum.
So maple syrup, coconut sugar, and molasses are other popular natural sweeteners. They just don't quite have the modern research to support them like honey, monk fruit, and stevia do. Composition-wise, they're all relatively similar. So they're mostly sucrose with some free glucose and fructose. They do all contain minerals such as calcium, zinc, and iron. But with the exception of molasses, their contribution of minerals isn't necessarily significant. Molasses, however, does contain 20% of your daily value for potassium, 10% of your daily value for calcium and B6, vitamin B6.
Wow.
15% of your daily value for iron, and 8% of your daily value for magnesium in just 1 tablespoon.
Wow.
So molasses has a lot of good benefits.
Yeah.
All three, so all maple syrup, molasses, and coconut sugar, all three of those are lower on the glycemic index than white sugar.
Okay.
So that means that they don't affect your blood glucose as much as sugar does. The award winner is coconut sugar. So the glycemic index of white sugar is around 65. The glycemic index of coconut sugar is around 35.
Hey.
And maple syrup has actually, it was around for longer when I was doing my research than I thought, because it was introduced by Native American tribes.
I love it. You know what?
Know
my kids have maple syrup like 5 times a week. And I do think, did I hear this? And am I right that maple syrup is like the immune system of the tree because it like carries all the nutrients through the tree? I heard that once. So then I'm always like, kids, get your nutrients.
It is like diluted from sap, and sap carries all the nutrients that a tree needs through the xylem and phloem of the tree cells. So
maybe technically.
And then you're concentrating it. So you're concentrating the sugars that are in it, which makes it sweet. Yeah. So could be. But it has gotten pretty little research attention, though preliminary studies have shown that it has antioxidant and anti-cancer properties, as well as the potential for the management of type 2 diabetes. Most of those studies, though, were in vitro, so like a pile of cells in a dish. So it's helpful, but not definitive of clinical significance for like whole humans, right? But sometimes, just like animal studies, we have to rely on in vitro studies because they're all we have, and they are like the first step in the right direction, right? So not to invalidate those studies, I use them when I look at research all the time if that's what's available, but human studies are always going to be better. So if you're just looking for an alternative to refined sugar to use occasionally, I think all three of those are good choices.
Okay.
I don't really have any qualms about any of them. They're natural, they're minimally processed, depending on the quality you purchase. And by the way, maple syrup, make sure it's actual maple syrup. Christopher and I were just grocery shopping yesterday, and we were in the aisle looking at like in the maple syrup section, then there's like pancake syrup, which is like high fructose corn syrup, right?
Yes, that is a change every household needs to make, is change from that
to like actual maple syrup. And you know it's actual maple syrup because it costs a lot more. Because it's like the bottle of like pancake syrup was like, I forget, Christopher did the math. If you broke it down per ounce, it was some like 20 times cheaper.
Yeah, that's true.
Than the like maple syrup, because it's just made with high fructose corn syrup, which is cheap.
Which is so cheap. Okay, so I go to our Amish store here in town and I get it's $30 a gallon for this huge jug of maple syrup, and we go through it in a month. Yeah. It's in my budget. It's delicious.
These sugars also have more favorable glucose or fructose to glucose ratios. So that can be important for people who have fructose intolerance. That's one reason why I don't recommend something like agave nectar, which does not have that same beneficial ratio of fructose to glucose. And honestly, it is not much better than high fructose corn syrup from what I've learned.
Okay.
Although it is probably better for our environment.
That's fair.
Than high fructose corn syrup. So if you're going to have something that's like health damaging, go for the agave syrup and at least save the world.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for health benefits beyond just replacing refined sugar with something a little healthier, then the research again kind of more supports things like honey, monk fruit, and stevia because they've just been studied more. It doesn't necessarily mean that molasses or coconut sugar or maple syrup don't have those same benefits. They just haven't, there's not a lot of research to back up what their benefits are.
Okay.
So okay, so moving on to the sugar alcohols. So sugar alcohols are things like xylitol, sorbitol, erythritol. Those are a popular alternative for many individuals who are looking to reduce their sugar intake. Compared to artificial sweeteners, there's very little evidence to suggest that sugar alcohols are harmful. So while there is evidence that suggests that those artificial sweeteners are harmful. We really don't have a lot showing that sugar alcohols are harmful. And in fact, many of the sugar alcohols do have some positive health benefits. First of all, they cause no detectable changes in blood glucose or insulin. So they're one leg up over artificial sweeteners in that sense, which makes them a safe alternative for people who have insulin resistance and diabetes.
Oh, this is good. Okay.
Xylitol has been found to reduce blood sugar levels and improve dental health by inhibiting the growth of oral inflammatory bacteria and by promoting tooth remineralization. That was a hard word to say.
I have the spray gum.
I have that too.
Yes, and then whenever I chew it, I'm like, I'm helping out my mouth and my teeth.
And then the flavor goes away after 10 seconds.
10 seconds. Oh my word, you are so right on that. You're so right on that.
My packets are old. And I'm like, is it because they're old? No, I remember doing this at the beginning.
So right. You know what? I more eat it like a treat. It's more like I just got to eat candy and I chewed it and then I spit it out. And you're right. In a minute. You're so right.
It loses its flavor. Erythritol and xylitol both also have been found to disrupt biofilms. So some of the more pathogenic bacteria in our body produce something called a biofilm, which is basically like a film protective covering that keeps them from being accessible to things like antibiotics, whether they're natural or herbal, or herbal, natural, or pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
So biofilms can be a big problem and are part of what contributes to antimicrobial like resistance to different drugs and different herbs.
Okay, wait. So did I catch it right? So by eating that helps because it breaks down the biofilm.
Exactly.
Oh, this is
so good. Erythritol and xylitol can disrupt those biofilms, and then help your body eliminate them.
Great. Chewing more spray gum.
Yeah, exactly. And sugar alcohols also have prebiotic potential, meaning they may feed and support the growth of beneficial gut bacteria.
This sounds good.
However, if you have digestive issues, it's probably a good idea just to kind of steer clear of them until you get those issues cleared up.
That's true.
Because sugar alcohols are part of the FODMAP group of fermentable carbohydrates that cause gas, bloating, diarrhea, and other digestive issues in people specifically who have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth like SIBO or IBS. So, and a large proportion of our population has SIBO and IBS, like, to be honest.
It just got less glamorous now.
A little bit less glamorous. Xylitol and sorbitol are more likely to trigger GI issues than erythritol. So if you have some GI issues but still want to try a sugar alcohol, erythritol might be your best bet.
Okay.
And if you experience mild GI discomfort in response to sugar alcohols, usually that reaction is temporary because your gut microbiota can adapt to sugar alcohols over time, which causes less of that like distressful response. But for anybody who's like just struggling with gut conditions, I feel like it just can aggravate the condition. And so I generally steer clear of them, or don't make them your main replacement. Like they're fine on occasion for sure.
Yeah.
But maybe don't make them your main substitute. So maybe don't be like making an apple pie with 2 cups of xylitol to replace the 2 cups of sugar. Know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's kind of the defining line. That's why it's like all of these, like that I've talked about, all of these alternative sweeteners, I think have a lot of pros to them, but you still just have to be careful about consumption.
Yes. It's smart. Still moderate.
Right.
Yes.
And if you're starting at like standard American diet level and you just want to replace all the sugar in your diet with these sugar alternatives, like I applaud that.
This is a good idea. I agree. In transition, this is
a transition. But then you do need to continue to moderate how much you're consuming because again, too much of anything can be a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, you're right. You're right.
So I just want to talk really quick about the recent negative publicity about erythritol and increased risk of heart attack and stroke.
Whoa.
So this is the article.
This is drama.
You may have seen a influx of media headlines. I know I saw them. Okay. This is the one from CNN News that came out.
Okay.
0-calorie sweetener linked to heart attack and stroke. Study finds.
This is dramatic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sounds scary. We just talked about this in, I think, our last episode, the 3 habits to be
Oh yeah. Well, I did wait. Be careful of the news.
Yeah. 3 habits to be healthier and happier. And one of them was to watch out for the news and not necessarily watch the news.
Yeah, but I was gonna say that's why I haven't heard it.
Yeah, we talked about sensationalist headlines, right? That is a sensationalist headline. So 0-calorie sweetener linked to heart attack and stroke, study finds. Okay. This is what the title of the article was.
Okay.
And that headline was based on a study that was published in Nature Medicine, a journal, called The Artificial Sweetener Erythritol and Cardiovascular Event Risk.
Okay.
So in this study, researchers measured levels of erythritol in the blood and found that those who had higher serum erythritol, so higher blood levels of erythritol, had an increased risk of stroke, heart attack, and death. So then this is a quote from the CNN article that was quoting that article. Okay. This is from Dr. Hazen, who was quoted in it. If your blood level of erythritol was in the top 25% compared to the bottom 25%, there was a 2-fold higher risk for heart attack and stroke, on par with the strongest of cardiac risk factors, such as diabetes. Okay. It's definitely sounding scary, right? Right. So the lab and animal research that was introduced in the paper that was pretty limited suggested that erythritol may cause blood clotting, which is then what drives increased cardiovascular risk. Okay. So definitely.
Yeah, I don't want my blood to clot.
No, sounds alarming.
It does sound alarming.
Here are 3 of the major problems with the study. Okay. The first one is that the researchers did not measure erythritol intake. So even though the title of the article is The Artificial Sweetener Erythritol and Cardiovascular Event Risk, they did not measure intake of erythritol. Okay. They only measured erythritol in the blood. Okay. So they didn't know how much or if people were consuming erythritol. That's important.
Knowledge I want to know. Yeah. Right. I want to go ask them now.
Yeah, they were measuring erythritol in the blood. Yeah. Erythritol, there's the second problem. Erythritol is a marker for poor diet and metabolic dysfunction. I'll get into that in a second. Okay. The third is that we don't know if high serum erythritol caused the increased cardiovascular risk or was just associated with it.
Correlation and causation.
Correlation and causation. Okay, so number 1, the researchers did not measure erythritol intake. They only measured erythritol in the blood. So the study did show a correlation between serum levels of erythritol and cardiovascular events, which then caused the researchers and the news to imply that erythritol consumption was the cause of elevated erythritol levels in the blood. But we didn't actually get any report of intake of erythritol amongst the participants. And there is good reason to believe that consuming erythritol was not the cause of the high serum erythritol levels, because erythritol was not approved as a sweetener at the beginning of the study and was not used widely as the study progressed. So it couldn't have been intake of erythritol because people weren't consuming erythritol at the time the study began.
Whoa, okay, then how was it in the body?
So erythritol is a marker for poor diet and metabolic dysfunction. This is the second problem. So if dietary erythritol wasn't driving up blood erythritol levels in these participants, what was the cause?
What is it?
So there was a 2017 study that found that humans produce erythritol endogenously, meaning we produce it in our own bodies.
What's up?
In response to the consumption of both glucose and fructose via what's called the pentose phosphate pathway, the PPP. I studied this in my biochemistry classes and I have diagrams of it.
No way.
So our bodies can actually produce erythritol through the pentose phosphate pathway in response to the consumption of glucose and fructose.
Fascinating.
So, unlike erythritol, which was not very widely available during the study time frame, glucose and fructose are consumed in enormous amounts in both the US and Europe. Like we have talked about this, right? Wow. We consume like 57 pounds of them a year as Americans.
So, wow.
So it is far more likely that glucose and fructose consumption was what was driving the increase in serum erythritol levels because of the conversion to erythritol in that pentose phosphate pathway.
Wow.
So basically what they're showing is that insulin resistance and high blood sugar, along with overconsumption of glucose and fructose, is more of the reason for the elevated serum erythritol levels.
Right. Yes, you've now blown the top off that.
Right. And obviously these things lead to increased risk of heart attack and stroke. So when Dr. Hazen from the CNN article said there was a twofold higher risk for heart attack and stroke, it's on par with the strongest of cardiac risk factors like diabetes. I mean, he wasn't wrong. It's on par with diabetes because it was likely being caused by the same factors that lead to diabetes.
The fructose and the right. Whoa.
And then the third thing, again, just to touch base on that, the third problem is that, again, it was association, not causation. So we talked about this in our How to Read and Understand Nutrition Research podcast. So make sure you check that episode out. Correlation is not causation. We don't need to discount it, right? We just need to be aware that things can be associated without being causal, like we just talked about. Yes. So the average layperson who's reading that article would not know that you can have high serum erythritol without consuming erythritol. Yeah. And certainly the doctor from CNN, remember, doctors don't necessarily know how to read research, that they're not scientists, they're doctors. Mm-hmm. So he probably doesn't necessarily even really know much about the pentose phosphate pathway. He doesn't know about the endogenous production of erythritol. And maybe he didn't know that erythritol wasn't approved as a sweetener at the beginning of the study.
Wow. That's wild. Yeah. Wow. That's wild. Yeah. You've proved it to me. I'm like, oh yeah, that's not good.
So certainly consuming erythritol will drive up your serum levels of erythritol. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, was it serum levels of erythritol that were causing increased cardiovascular risk? Mm-hmm. Or was it consumption of glucose and fructose? Yeah. And therefore the development of issues like metabolic syndrome and diabetes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. So just because something is elevated in people who have those conditions doesn't mean that's what caused the condition. Mm-hmm. It might mean the condition is what causes that substance to become elevated because it's a stress response from the body.
Wow. Wow.
So remember, we talked about the news media will always put out a fear-inducing sensationalist headline anytime they can. Yeah. So that is like a perfect example, right?
Yes. Yes.
Right. So if you just read the news headline, you would be like, oh God, I can't have erythritol anymore. Right. You'd have to read the actual news article, then you'd have to go to the research study they quoted, and then
you'd have to know what PPP means.
You'd have to understand the research. Right. So again, the average person has no chance, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And in fact, that study, more interestingly, I think, confirmed what we've already known and been saying for decades, is that consumption of glucose and fructose can drive heart disease and stroke.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. I feel like that. Yes. Proven. Yes.
Yeah. So there we go.
Yeah, there it is.
But there is still an association between high levels of erythritol and blood clotting and heart disease and stroke.
Still moderate.
So still it's good to be careful about it, right? Yes. Because we just don't know. Now somebody would actually need to do a study specifically on erythritol consumption where they measured, and again, it would have to be one of those long-term studies where they started studying people who had no symptoms or signs of heart disease, and then have them start consuming erythritol on a regular basis and follow them over the next 25 to 30 years to see if they develop heart disease.
Yeah. Right.
Right. That's how we would do that study. So,
yeah.
And ideally it would be placebo controlled and double blinded and all those things.
Right.
But
and
when you're doing human studies,
right. You're right.
Exactly. Right. So one final option, and probably the best option for natural sugars in your diet, is whole foods.
Yes.
So the sugars contained in whole fruit or something like a sweet potato do not have the same effect on your health as a soda or candy bar, right? We know that.
Yes.
Because fiber and water in real food carbohydrates slows the absorption of sugars and promotes the feeling of fullness, satiety, preventing that blood sugar roller coaster that happens when we extract sugar and separate them from their natural fibers, from their enzymes, from all those things that help our body digest them, and just consume that concentrated sugar. So of course, real food carbohydrates also contain an abundance of vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients that support optimal health. So things like blueberries, strawberries, cranberries all support a healthy glycemic response. They can improve insulin sensitivity, improve glucose tolerance. So again, the best option, if you're really craving something just sweet, is to eat fruit.
Yes.
Or a sweet potato or something like that. I remember reading in a book like on cancer. I think it was Chris Beat Cancer. He has that like book that he put out. Anyway, he was talking about fruit, and he was like, yes, sugar does drive cancer and fruit does contain sugar, but nobody gets cancer from eating too much fruit.
Yeah. I like it.
Like that's just not the thing, right? So yes, people who need to watch their sugar intake do need to be careful that they consume lower glycemic fruits. So sticking to the berries is usually what I recommend. If I'm dealing with a patient who has like fructose intolerance, then fruit is kind of off the table because it's high in fructose. If somebody has insulin resistance, if they have high blood sugar, I have them limit their fruit intake, but that's not for forever. That's until they get their blood sugars
and if you pair it with the fat, that helps. Yep,
pairing it with
the fat.
The
end of your meal.
Exactly. Listen to our tips and tricks for controlling your blood sugar.
Yep.
So anyway, for the average healthy person, consuming fruit is probably, it's the best way if you're gonna, like, if you're having cravings for sugar in the middle of the afternoon, eating an apple with almond butter or a bowl of fresh berries is the best way to beat that craving and get the sugar that you need. That's the ultimate best way.
Yes, without grabbing a candy bar that is
right.
Yes.
Then if you need something sweet beyond that, which I mean, nobody needs something sweet beyond that, but you know what I mean?
On your birthday.
Then consider things like honey, like monk fruit, like stevia, like coconut sugar, molasses, all of those things I think can have a place, because honestly, like, as humans, our culture is just built around special occasions and baked goods and all of those. So you know, you can make things like applesauce muffins or banana muffins or things that are sweetened with fruit, but also a lot of those recipes still contain like maple syrup or honey or or coconut sugar. So
it is okay for those.
It is okay. So again, it's all just about moderation, but still, like, truly, if you are on a standard American diet and you're simply looking to replace your sugar intake, like cup for cup, like you're not willing to reduce your sugar sweet intake, you just want to cup for cup replace it, any of these alternative sweeteners that we talked about are going to be better. Right. You might have to be careful with things like xylitol, which can cause a pretty severe GI response if you consume like a cup of them, right?
You will poop yourself.
You might poop yourself. So yeah, you do need to be careful with things like that. But for the most part, like if you're going to cup for cup replace it with maple syrup or coconut sugar or stevia or whatever, you're going to have better health outcomes than you would if you were just consuming processed, refined, high fructose products, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I fully support just doing whatever you need to do at this moment in time. But again, when we talked in our sugar cereal, we have to remember that sugar has addictive properties. And so if what you're dealing with is addiction, you need to get to the root of that problem. Just like if you're smoking, maybe nicotine gum is a good start, but you don't want to be on nicotine gum for the rest of your life either. Like, you want to get to the root of that addiction. It's like that with sugar. So I think getting to a point where like sweet treats become
more of a special occasion
thing
than the norm every meal
versus a daily need in your life. And then truly, if what you're having is like something sweet, like every couple days or once a week, then like you pretty much can replace the sweeteners in that item with any of the sweeteners we've talked about, and you most likely won't have any negative health outcomes.
And as you're going along this journey, your taste buds will change and adjust. And so your addiction will lessen a little bit, the taste, the craving, it will all adjust, and it naturally will kind of get better just as you're on the journey.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this in our sugar cereal, but one of the issues that diabetics often have is their taste buds actually need more. They've become accustomed to sugar and sweetness, and their taste buds need more sugar in order for something to taste sweet. So where you start out with like maybe 1 packet of sugar in your coffee, it can truly become to the point, I've seen it, where people need like 8 packets of sugar in their coffee in order for it to taste as sweet as it once did with 1 packet of sugar. So as you retrain your taste buds,
it won't need as much.
It just doesn't need as much. Something like the blood sugar solutions diet, Mark Hyman's blood sugar solutions diet, I still recommend that for people that are really like just stuck on their cravings and addictions for sugar, because it really does reset your taste buds in roughly 21 days.
That's amazing.
Because I talked about that in our sugar cereal, but I still remember I did that I think it's just a 21, maybe it's 28 days, but by day 21, I remember eating a bell pepper and thinking, I never knew bell peppers were so sweet.
I'm there.
Yes, but it's because your taste buds have been reset. So because you're not consuming sugar and dulling your taste buds all the time, foods that are naturally sweet will taste sweeter to you. So that's where you can then, from that point, like move into something like applesauce muffins that don't have any added sugar and they still taste sweet to you.
So it's interesting in life how those indulgences, when you do them all the time, they just don't have that sweetness. But when you kind of let yourself have the self-control, and when you have indulgences just in life, they're sweeter when you're not so indulgent. It's interesting how that works.
So we have things like, Christopher and I have things like honey sweetened oatmeal cookies that we make. Or like, and we put the Lily's stevia sweetened chocolate chips in them. Like, I just don't want to give the like illusion that I don't eat anything sweet.
And no desserts.
I mean, especially since it's interesting how my mindset has shifted since becoming pregnant, just because I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to help a child navigate this world. And if I just fully deprive them and never let them have anything sweet, then they won't learn how to moderate their intake of things like that.
Right. And then if there's no like joy and specialty in your eating, they're just going to think like, I eat only vegetables or blah, blah, blah. But when it's like more of like, oh, and this is our treat with the honey drizzled, like there's a joy to that, which should be.
I think their first birthday, because like honey is not something infants are supposed to have under 1 year of age. Everybody does like a smash cake or does like a big cake. Like, I don't want my kid to just eat cake on their first birthday. I don't have any judgment for people who do that.
Right.
It's a cute tradition. It's not for me personally, but I do want to give her honey, because it'll be like, that's the special 1 year thing.
Well, I was going to say this earlier and then I forgot. So I watched Secrets of the Zoo. Is this cute show. Okay. So the polar bear on it had its 1 year birthday and they made a cake. I swear to you, I'm going to go eat it. I was like, I want that cake.
It wasn't made with like sardines.
It was, well, there was inside of it, but the top cake layer, which this is your little baby's good. It was like honey, pumpkin, like almond fiber or whatever. And they made this cake that I was like, I would eat that cake. Like, that's awesome. So that's the kind you can make for your baby.
And I will fill it with sardines.
Is it different bites? I don't know.
Babies won't know the difference.
They won't know.
Anyway, just all that to say. I think there's room for artificial sweeteners in our diet. I think it can be part of alternative. Alternative sweeteners. I think there's room for alternative sweeteners in our diet. And I think it's, again, important to not be so rigid and so inflexible that we create stress. Exactly. So you take care of you with where you're at on this journey. So you know what your next step is. You take that step. And again, just don't think that like I'm some perfect, like I eat only vegetable loaves made with magician. Like ground up zucchini and carrots. And
somehow you make zucchini cupcakes taste good.
Oh my God. I actually do make zucchini. Okay.
Do you?
Oh my
What's
God.
the sweetener in it?
Okay. What is the sweetener in it?
I have to link the recipe, and I'm here for that.
I think it's either maple syrup or honey. I can't remember. Okay. Again, because I said we use honey when we bake.
But a liquid one. Okay.
Yeah, it's a raw honey because it's from our own bees. We don't process it. Okay, so it is like cups. I think it's 3 cups. I'd have to look it up. It's zucchini brownies. 3 cups of shredded zucchini.
Okay.
Almond butter. Cacao powder, like raw cacao powder. It doesn't actually have any flour in it. It's just the almond butter and then the cacao powder. We add in collagen.
Yeah,
and then
makes it little
the Lily's stevia sweetened chocolate chips. Gosh, and then probably I can't remember. I haven't made it for a year because we haven't had zucchini. Because we eat it out of our garden. But it's honey or maple syrup to sweeten it. And then it probably has baking powder and some of those like salt, vanilla. They are like the best brownies on earth. Seriously.
Okay, I want the
so
recipe.
Packed with zucchini.
Okay.
So actually, I totally can do this, but
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm going to eat that. I eat brownies all the time, but now that I eat less of the sugar, I have to get creative. So I do black bean, but this sounds right up.
And the black bean brownies are delicious also.
Okay.
Yeah. See, so there's lots of ways to satisfy your sweet tooth and do it in a way that's health promoting. Yep. And again, not in a way where you have to have a black bean brownie after every meal.
Right.
But it could be a special occasion treat, or honestly, like if you just have one of those once a day and that's where you're starting out, like that's so much better than 90% of the American population.
Yes, agreed.
Right. So like, I just want to like free people from the judgment. That was kind of the idea behind this alternative sweeteners, was to give people a way to indulge their sweet tooth without some of the negative health consequences that come with it. Because we're all just trying to like navigate this saturated poisonous world, right? So
and still be happy when we eat.
And still be happy. And I still think sweet treats are an inevitable part of like meals and family gatherings and things like that. So we need a way to navigate them safely.
Yes. Well, I love this. And now I'm inspired to go make brownies, I guess. I don't know.
I'll have to find that recipe and we can post it.
Okay, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Elaine.
Yes.
And for the rest of you, go be renegades.
Go be renegades.
Thank you for listening to the Renegade Nutrition Podcast.
Please keep in mind that this podcast is an educational service that provides general health information. The content on this podcast is not a substitute for direct, personal, professional medical care and diagnosis. You should always talk to your doctor before making a dietary or lifestyle change. Go be renegades!
Go be renegades!